Depression is something that can be treated. It's not something that is completely hopeless.
If those educational textbooks have had an impact on actual behavioral change in the children, we would not be having the kind of violence we see in our society. So then there is a gap. Because why? These textbooks are textbooks. They're theoretical. Students learn it, they mug it up, they memorize it, they write beautiful answers and get A grade.
And it's not practical.
It's not practical.
We have to really start from the time the child is born if we are going to talk about mental health.
Adults to be role models of mental health, because children learn from us. If I tell my child, say thank you, say promise, keep your promise, but I don't do it, the child is not going to listen to what I said. They're going to look at what I do. So as adults, are you an epitome of mental health? Are you something that children looking at you would think, this auntie and uncle, the way she talks is nice. The way they relate to other people is nice. They even treat the domestics, the maids in their house beautifully, kindly. I like to be like that. So you have to be a role model.
Hello everyone, you're watching Conversations with Alanki. On today's episode, I will be discussing about mental health and the importance of raising awareness. It is a topic that doesn't receive sufficient attention and therefore many suffer silently. In today's episode, I will be having Professor Piyanjali D'Souza, a professor in clinical psychology, and psychologist Nivendra Uduman. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. For agreeing to have this conversation with me. So to start things off, Professor Piyanjali, could you just tell me why is mental health so important for everyone?
Well, I think, so a human being has a mind and a body, isn't it? And we do know that as we grow older, inevitably, however much we eat healthy or organic or exercise, our body will deteriorate and age and get sick. However, the mind is quite different. The mind can uplift even an aging body or a diseased body, because we do know people who are much older, who are quite stricken with illnesses, but they get on well in life. We also know that the health of the mind has an impact on the physical health of the body also. So therefore, if you were to look at what is stronger and what is more supportive throughout our lifespan, it would be the mind, because the body will inevitably decay. So therefore, investing in your mental health and things that you could do to uplift it and keep it strong and resilient is so important, Alanki.
Like you said, Professor, like everyone focuses on being physically fit and healthy. But like you said, your mental health can have an impact on how fit you are physically as well. And there are many stress-related illnesses as well that can be caused as a result of not being mentally healthy. So what is the most common mental health illness in Sri Lanka at the moment, and what is the most affected age group?
Yeah, okay, so it's a little difficult to answer that question because we don't have adequate research or numbers to say what might be the most commonly diagnosed mental illness or the age group that is most commonly affected. But a very educated guess would be that it would be depression and anxiety that sort of hit the top ends of the chart if you look at a spectrum, right? And so that affects people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. It affects people from different age groups, whether you're someone who's at a top strata in society or someone who's at a more lower socioeconomic background. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't discriminate. It affects everyone in different ways. So most often depression and anxiety in Sri Lanka would be diagnosed in a hospital setting because that is the most common place that a person would go to, right? But then again, the numbers are not very specific. So age group wise, to answer your question, Alanki, again, it's difficult because children also get diagnosed with depression and anxiety in Sri Lanka, and so does someone who's in their 70s or 80s. So it's a very broad spectrum, right? But these days, from experience, and I think Professor could also add to that, from what I'm seeing, that it's mostly people from their early 20s to around mid 30s, 40s that are in the age group that are commonly experiencing these mental health issues.
What really causes mental health issues?
It's a broad range of things. Okay, so there is no one clear cause that we can often identify, but it's always a intersecting of a lot of things. So biologically, of course, we know that there can be causes, like you told earlier. Stress can sometimes cause issues, both physically and mentally as well, and certain changes that happen in our brain chemistry sometimes. And also there's a genetic component also that we have to take into account, that sometimes through family history, through genetics, we can be vulnerable. But genetics alone doesn't make you vulnerable, but you also have to be in an environment where you might be susceptible to develop a mental health issue, right? So, and of course the environment or the psychosocial kind of a setup that you live in, right? Your family, your community, whether there are any stressors in your life. So a lot of those things can also impact your mental health either positively or negatively, right? So it's a very, if you have to look at it from a holistic kind of a picture, where there's the biological part, there's the psychological part, and there's a social part that all come together to most often cause a mental health problem for someone. Yeah.
Right. Professor Pianjali, what sort of advice would you give to someone who's feeling down or depressed?
Well, I think we use the term depression or depressed very loosely. Even if somebody is a little sad or not having a great day, which all of us have had and will have in our life, that doesn't mean that you got the disease depression. To diagnose a mental condition, there should be a minimum number of criteria which only a professional would be able to do, such as a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But we use the term very loosely when we say somebody is anxious, somebody is depressed. It doesn't mean that you got the disorder. Then what could we do? So if you feel that for a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks you have been feeling very low mood, you have lost pleasure in activity that you liked before, your sleeping has changed, your eating habits have changed, you have difficulty in concentrating, then you might, we don't know, so don't diagnose yourself. If you feel, then go and see a professional. Professional would be a clinical psychologist, a counseling psychologist, a psychiatrist, who might be able to see whether you are at the diagnosable level. However, a vast majority of us would have some of the symptoms, but we don't have the illness, that's human nature. And that is common, and that is normal and natural. Then for those kind of people, what could you do is what we should be focusing on now. So have somebody whom you can trust, whom you have confidence in, who won't pull the rug under your feet, to talk about your feelings. That's number one. So social support, therefore, is really very beneficial. We find a protective factor. Number two is, think about the activities that you did before you felt this way, which brought meaning and pleasure to your life. We call it in psychology term mastery and pleasure. So for example, you may have liked playing cards with friends. You may have liked to go out for a walk in the morning, but you don't feel like it now, but those days you enjoyed it. Even if you don't feel like it now, do it nevertheless. So when you keep on doing things that you liked before, even sometimes forcefully, it brings back joy in your life. So things like that is useful. What some people do is they flow with this depressive tendencies and not try to come out of it. Then they might try to use substances, thinking that, a little bit of alcohol might make me feel better, some drugs, some smoking. That doesn't work. So it's really important that if you're feeling low, not to go on to using and abusing substances, because that will not lift your mood up. You see, secondly, oversleeping, overeating, because those are things that will further pull you down. So it's really important not only to activate strategies that uplift your mood, like social support, doing things that you liked before, but also not to do things that will pull you down further.
So Nivendra, like a point you made that interested me was that genetics could also play a part in determining if a person could get depression.
Yeah, potentially.
In such a case, does such a person have hope of recovering or coming out of depression?
Yeah, I think one can recover and one can live a very meaningful life, even though they might experience depression at some point in their lives. So even if there is a genetic predisposition doesn't mean that that person will always be vulnerable to develop it. If they have a supportive environment around them, if they have good family and community support, right? If they have a good, like Professor said, some people that they can trust and talk to, they have activity going on in their life, and they have this sense of achieving things, or this sense of being good at something. So that would all act as buffers to them developing a mental health issue. But on the other hand, if the environment is also contributing to the fact that they might develop it because of the genetic inheritance, that's not to say that they can't come out of it, but it requires them to also actively engage in treatment, right? So depression is something that can be treated. It's not something that is completely hopeless, right? It can be treated, people recover, and I think we've seen, I'm sure in our friend circles, in our work, that people live very fruitful and meaningful lives after they come out of it, right? Because you can. But to do that, I think what I see a lot in Sri Lanka is that people tend to either engage in doing things for themselves that might not always be healthy, like after they self-diagnose themselves that they're depressed, right? Or anxious. The second thing is they prolong seeking help for various reasons. One is the stigma. Two, sometimes people have financial difficulties of seeking support. But again, if you're seeking support in the government sector, in our hospitals, then it's free. So you can seek services for mental health issues as well, right? And the third thing is this bias that we have that, oh, I can get out of it, or okay, I don't have to seek help. There are these things I can do and I can recover, is another kind of a thought process that a lot of people have, which sometimes is not always feasible. So you need someone else also to support you through that journey. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. It's like you said, you need support. You need a friend or family or someone in your family or a colleague to support you. But different people have different views, and I feel that some people think of the view that depression is not as real as a physical ailment. They just disregard it. They do not acknowledge it. They just think, some say that, if you're privileged, you tend to get depressed. How does one with depression cope when his or her surroundings are like this?
In a sense, when the surroundings don't accept.
When they don't accept that depression is a reality that one struggles with.
I think the reason, Alanki, for most mental conditions, other than the more obvious ones, is that it's not seen, right? It's not visual.
Right.
It's a felt experience within. And number two is we try to deny it and act differently on top of that. So unlike if you get dengue or if you get a heart attack, it's obvious to everybody. You're rushed in an ambulance, so you can see it. That's number one. So therefore, it's very easy for us to deny that one can feel low. Secondly, we also see in certain Asian countries, including ours, that this, say, depression as one of the more common illnesses, it's more physicalized. So we call it somatized, where it is more indicated as bada ridanawa, oluwa kekkumai, I feel a bit nauseous. So because why? Our societies accept physical symptoms rather than talking about the mental thing. Because you don't like to talk to somebody who says, Mara dukkaya, I feel like doing this. We don't encourage that kind of talk.
It's viewed negatively.
Yeah, it's viewed negatively because we don't open to it, because we don't want to listen to those people's issues. It's like it threatens us. We don't know how to talk about it. We don't know how to console them. Those skills are lacking in some of us. So because of that, individuals who may be undergoing certain mental situations might then unconsciously, they don't do it consciously, might say, Mata oluwa kekkume, I don't feel like going to school today, I don't feel like getting up on a Monday morning. But actually it's nothing to do with the body, it's to do with the mind. So therefore, what can we do in order to overcome it is that really our society has to be open to these kind of issues that arise in all of us at some point or the time, and to be open and talk about it. Like even doing programs like this, we are trying to reach out the community to normalize these conditions, that these exist, and that we can in our own little way help the people around us to be open to their lows in life, isn't it? So as more people know that these mental states can occur, anybody who's watching similar programs can give an ear to a friend, to a neighbor, to a cousin, to a niece, to a nephew who is feeling low, might be able to detect their signs. If they're withdrawn, if they're introverted, you can detect their behavior has changed. They're using more negative language when they're talking. Then you can go up to that person and talk to them, say, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Why didn't you come yesterday near the well? Where everybody gets together to have an evening bath, but I didn't see you yesterday, day before. Is everything okay? So what we want to do is for people to be more aware and unconsciously or consciously support people.
And reach out.
Absolutely. Yeah, reach out.
What are your views, Nivendra? Why is there so much stigma attached to mental health illnesses?
Well, I think it boils down to again of the fact that you can't see them, right? They're invisible most of the time, and unless it comes out in either bodily symptoms or behaviorally, right? And the second thing is, we as a society, if you take from the time a child is born or a child is at home in infancy and then goes to kindergarten, rarely do we ever talk about the mind or emotions or help children understand emotions, and that is not a part of the school curriculum per se, where they learn about emotional intelligence, right? Or they learn about empathy, or where they learn about how to recognize certain things that might need attention. So because of this lack of education in our system, and we have to wait till we are adolescents or adults to really understand what this is about, that is one reason that I think adds to the stigma, because we grow up kind of understanding that the brain is a very separate entity from the body, right? And that's how I see it. And because we grow up thinking that, we don't associate that both of these things are connected, the brain and the body, and what impacts the brain affects the body, and what affects the body impacts the brain. It works vice versa, right? So because of this distinction that we see the brain as this very complex, it is complex, but this thing that we can't understand, it's somewhere there, out there in the horizon, then we don't pay attention to it and its growth, its development, right? So education, learning and sitting for exams and all of that, yes, that does develop one part of your brain and it helps you, but we don't look at nourishing the mental health or the emotional well-being starting from home, right? Because we don't talk about it. Now, for example, if a child falls very simply and starts to cry at a very young age, most of us would hear in our society saying, "Oka tandanda deyakda negative," right? Or "Why are you crying like a baby?" So children learn at a very small age that certain emotions are not meant to be expressed, right? Because they get negative feedback from the other side. Or emotions are not meant to be felt at all because there's constant invalidation, right? Where you're told, oh, you think you have problems? I had more problems than you when I was your age. You're not supposed to be crying, right? Or you're not supposed to be feeling this way. And there are adults in their 30s, in their 40s, who still struggle to emote, to express, and to accept that they can have negative emotions or difficult emotions because of those messages they received very early on at home, right? And also, I think it's another important factor is that parenting, right? Where, for example, again, a child, we have this tendency sometimes in our society to not soothe the child, right? To not give the child emotional validation when they need it, but to really have this very tough kind of approach to bringing up children. I'm not generalizing and saying every family is like this, but you find that a lot in this country. So that's another reason where children, as they grow up into adolescence and adulthood, they don't learn ways to soothe themselves. They don't learn ways to care for themselves because that is not really encouraged, right? From a very small age. But it's always about being the good boy, giving to other people, being good at this and that. And your self-worth or your self-esteem revolves around how much you achieve, how much you do. But rarely do we learn to be compassionate towards ourselves and to love ourselves as people. And that is also very vital, even though we are rooted in a philosophy that really speaks about compassion and being kind not only to other people but to yourself, but we don't really embody that in our country. So I think there's a whole range of things that we have to talk about to answer that question as to why there is a negative view or stigma around this issue. Yeah.
Professor, do you think that mental health should be integrated into mainstream education?
That's such an important question, and I think theoretically there is a subject called life skill, Jivana Kusalata, I think. and that has I haven't looked at those textbooks, but I'm assuming it would have a lot of things to do with nourishing one's mental health. You know, how to be kind to your neighbor, how not to bully somebody in school, how to help an elderly person cross the road. Now, all those activities, if a young person builds into his or her behaviors, would obviously nourish his mental health. However, what we have seen, the real picture of mental health in Sri Lanka is different. If those educational textbooks have had an impact on actual behavioral change in the children, we would not be having the kind of violence we see in our society. You know, we have a lot of violence in our, that's the truth. So then there is a gap. Because why? These textbooks are textbooks. They're theoretical. Students learn it, they mug it up, they memorize it, they write beautiful answers and get A grade.
And it's not practical.
It's not practical. What's the point? So therefore, I really urge, if anybody from the education sector is looking, to really consider making these things practical. So it's not about how to help an elderly person cross a zebra crossing. Then they say, "Atallagana, eyath ekka gihilla cross kala ehema tino." You can write it, but you have to do it to inculcate those kind of good feelings of helping somebody, to inculcate feelings of compassion towards somebody, which then leads to self-compassion towards yourself, which grows mental health. So the education system has to really revolutionize itself and to make it practical, so that this Jivana Kusalata subject, life skills, can actually transform a person and encourage the growth of that child's mental health, which will obviously be the mental health of our society.
Right. I mean, I think depression can develop at any stage. Therefore, it's important that you actually make children aware of what's really happening. You know, spreading awareness is really important. I mean, it's an important step in actually helping victims or helping children who might be suffering silently from depression or other forms of mental health illnesses. Finally, as we've come to the end of the conversation, is there any message that both of you would like to give to our viewers?
What I would like to say is we have to normalize this conversation in our society, and I think we have to develop ways to do it, because sometimes our language, especially in the local languages, doesn't allow us sometimes to really express what we're feeling, and some of these words that we have for mental health problems or feelings even sometimes is very technical. So we have to sort of come up with ways where schools, parents, etc. can teach young people, teach children, because that's where it starts from. We have to start from there, where they are taught or they understand how to express, how to have healthy responses to their emotions, right? How to also feel for someone else. So what my message would be is we have to really start from the time the child is born if we are going to talk about mental health. So it's not at a workshop when you're 16 or 18 or 25, but it has to start during this time where the child is still being, rocked by the mother, because that is where it starts. So that's what I really want to say. We have to revolutionize the way we look at this, and we have to go back to basics.
Right, Professor?
Okay, so I'll extend from what Nivendra said as well. There are so many things that we could say, but if there's something, it would be that before we talk about mental illnesses and whether you have one or whether somebody known to you has one, what you can do is to really grow your mental health. If you are healthy, like for example in the physical sense, if we work out, if we eat well, we can live a healthier physical life, isn't it? So similarly, if you can do things to nourish your mind, the tendency for you to get a mental illness is that much lesser. And how do we nourish our mind? There are many practices like social support I spoke to you about, then life skills, compassion towards others, compassion towards yourself. So therefore, the first message I want to give is practice strategies that boost your mental health. Forget about mental illnesses. Work on something that you can do. And if you do get a mental illness, certainly go to professionals. There are many in our country fully qualified and competent. The second, which is actually building on what Nivendra said, is that adults to be role models of mental health, because children learn from us. If I tell my child, say thank you, say promise, keep your promise, but I don't do it, the child is not going to listen to what I said. They're going to look at what I do. So as adults, are you an epitome of mental health? Are you something that children looking at you would think, this auntie and uncle, the way she talks is nice. The way they relate to other people is nice. They even treat the domestics, the maids in their house beautifully, kindly. I like to be like that. So you have to be a role model. And when you're a role model of mental health, the children will be learning from you. Then generationally, our community and our culture and our country uplifts its mental health. So those are the two messages I would like to give.
So you lead by example.
Absolutely.
I know I said it was the end of the conversation, but something just came to my mind. What are the little things that someone can do to improve their mental well-being? Like it could be something like listening to music, or playing a sport. Like, are there any little activities that someone could actually take up that would actually improve their mental well-being?
I think there is a lot, right? And it all depends again on what you like to do, what your interests are. So again, taking up a hobby like music or reading, or it could be doing something creative, it could be so many things. Yeah, that is definitely very, very positive to do for your mental health. Physical activity is one of those things that really helps, right? So it doesn't have to be hardcore workouts at the gym, but it can also be things like yoga, it can be just going for a walk, it could be swimming, whatever you like to do. So you don't have to kind of associate it with really heavy kind of exercise routine for your mental health, right? Eating, I think there's a lot of research going around saying that your gut health has a lot to do with your brain health, right? So what we eat, the nutrition, having simple things, we talk about balanced kind of meals, right? Making sure we get a good hydration. All of that really helps as well. And I think also some people draw from religious and spiritual practices. Other people draw from mindfulness, so it's a whole gamut of things you can do, but you don't also have to put pressure on yourself to do a lot of things, because now there's a lot of talk about all of this in social media and so on. But even one practice that you take and do for yourself, maybe on a daily basis, like Professor said earlier, it helps you develop this sense of mastery and this sense of pleasure and find joy in doing something. And I think that can really promote mental health over a long
as long as you find something that works for you. Right. That was a very important conversation we had. Thank you, Professor Piyanjali and Nuvendra.
Thank you for having us.
I do hope that all of you who watch this would find this useful. Do remember, mental health is important. Do take care of your mental health. And I hope that this segment would have improved the mental well-being of those who watch this segment. I will be back with another conversation. Until then, take care.